It's very fortunate that in inclusive societies supply empowering tools for small people to speak out loud. I would like to start with a personal memory that is not necessarily connected to divided society. Growing up in Israel, a relatively young state that was established upon a rich heritage of historization, one can hardly avoid the intensive occupation with the remembrance of the Jewish Holocaust during World War II. Next to possible personal relations young Israelis have with people who experienced the horror themselves and are thus exposed to their stories, as an Israeli you are also constantly confronted with the efforts of a certain national mechanism, if not machinery, dedicated to the eternalization of this horrific narrative. This mechanism includes ceremonies with silent moments, high school trips to concentration camps in Poland, visits to Holocaust museums, countless documentaries in different media, organized meetings with survivors, and of course, numerous memorials in the public space. I might sound cynical here, but it seems to me that above all those quite well-orchestrated activities hangs one number, a brand name that comes to summarize all that you should not dare to forget. 6 million. 6,000,000. 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis, with pathos pronounced 6 millions. In a soft and contemplative voice, 6 million. Plainly engraved in stone, 6 million. So often mentioned, appropriated to this one and only meaning for the Israeli, there is nothing else in the world that can stand behind this number. So loaded but flattened, it became that this number is no longer questioned, neither its truthfulness nor its significance and alleged timelessness. And then suddenly, all this explodes in my face. In the age of 21, I have left Israel, and thus the safe boundaries within which the sacred number resides undisturbed. I still remember the moment, visiting a memorial site in Berlin, reading on the wall, on the information wall, about the deeds of the Nazi regime, a blunt summary of victims. 5.9 million Jews, 0.2 million Roma and Sinti, so-and-so, homosexuals, communists, etc. 5.9 million Jews. I do not know whether it was shock, disillusionment, relief, or liberation that I felt. Whatever it was striking. The solid fortress of my past was attacked and falling apart. Each of my 6 millions was assaulted. You might say I have been simply naive back then. I personally attribute it to the circumstances in which I grew up. Nevertheless, upon this incident, I suddenly had to question and redefine my understanding of past, truth, history, and memory. All very complex and fluid concepts that I then slowly learned. Personally, I prefer to avoid hermetic definitions and to leave the theoretical discourse regarding these terms to you, my colleagues, historians, theoreticals. My fascination lies in the practical potential such concepts unfold within societal processes. Instead, interested in the interfaces and applications of history, or what Jeffrey Olick calls technologies of memory, I would like to talk today about commemoration, and more specifically about empowering commemorative objects. In the following minutes, I will take you through a series of commemorative projects that, in my opinion, demonstrates an interesting phenomenon in the memory landscape. And maybe now we can turn off the lights. I begin with this image depicting the destruction of Saddam Hussein's statue upon the arrival of US troops in Baghdad in order to emphasize the political relevance commemorative objects obviously have and to draw a certain line of departure for this review. It is evident that both our individual and collective memory are constantly evolving, shaping and reshaping themselves and us all together. We generate, develop and distort our memories on a daily basis, influenced by people, objects, texts or situations that we encounter and witness. When such encounters are planned and intended to be influential upon our memory, they are of a commemorative character. Such people, objects or rituals function as a stimulus. Their intention is to construct a sense of past in our present and hereby either cultivate or manipulate our memory regarding a specific past. Commemorative objects have been constructed for centuries in public spaces, designed to write history and remind societies and future generations of past narratives. Their solid materials such as stone, marble, and later bronze, steel and concrete protect them from damages of weather, and time, but, moreover, they hold tight and eternalize one chosen memory narrative, protecting it from competing interpretations of the past. The memorial, elevated from the ground, its bottom part designed as a platform on which a sculptural symbolic representation is placed, became thus a stage for political expression, a tool with which collective identity is produced, past and present condensed and reorganized for the sake of an aspired common future. But when the master narrative is questioned, or those at power eventually change, it is exactly these static objects that are being violently attacked and replaced. So do authorities write and rewrite history and we simply consume it passively? Well, as I said, in the last decades we witnessed the appearance of other kinds of memorials. Let us start in the US, where after the two world wars, voices against the construction of so-called dead monuments are heard, favoring instead rather functional commemoration. And Rushankan describes the living memorials of this period as useful projects such as community centers, libraries, playgrounds, forests, or schools, whose memorial purpose was marked with plaques, flagpoles, or minimal sculptural elements. These perform a service for the society and conceptually fold the sacrifices of war into the pattern of democratic community life. The US-American choice was of patriotism and better future, rather than the impossible attempts to represent the tragedies of past war. On the other side of the ocean, it seems that the way Germans began commemorating their past was understandably different. Since the 1970s, as part of the Vergangenheitsaufarbeitung and the coming to terms with the crimes of fascism that Stefan also mentioned yesterday, numerous German memorial designers choose to deal with the void that the terrible destruction of war left behind. Again, instead of symbolizing the horror, they dedicated the memorial to the emptiness, giving negative shapes to what has been exterminated and was now gone. The negative restoration of the Ashot fountain in the main town square of Kassel is a good example for such a project. The fountain that was funded by a Jewish citizen in the middle of the... The fountain that was funded by a Jewish citizen was condemned by the Nazis and destroyed in 1939, leaving its basin empty in the middle of the square. In the mid-1980s, instead of reconstructing the fountain in order to revitalize its memory, artist Horst Hoheisel constructed its negative form, mirrored deep into the earth. The fountain now exists as a hollow negative of its original, the water gushing down beneath the feet of visitors who now stand themselves on thick glass windows where the fountain once stood. Around the same time, but some 300 kilometers to the north, artists Jochen and Esther Gerz created in Hamburg the monument against fascism, war and violence, and for peace and human rights. The tall pillar was made of aluminium plated with a layer of soft lead. Temporary inscription invited citizens and visitors to engrave their names on the monument surface and in doing so to commit themselves to remain vigilant. As more names covered the bottom of the pillar, it was slowly lowered into the ground, giving room for new names till it eventually disappeared totally. Fearing that an everlasting monument will serve as a permanent holder of memory and release the community from the commitment to remember fascism, the artist chose a temporary object that in its disappearance threw the burden of memory back to the people of the city. In addition, unlike conventional solid monuments that forbid interaction and adaptation, the soft materiality of this one allowed and even invited visitors to take part in it. The monument achieved its function only upon active participation of the public. Now, most likely referring to Foucault's concept of counter-memory, James Young describes this kind of recent German commemorative projects as counter-monuments. Monuments that with their negative shapes, their temporariness, their self-destructiveness and their non-representational character negate and challenge, thus counter the basic concept of the monument. They force us to look within ourselves for memory rather than in the object or site that we visit. Counter-monuments construct spaces with capacity for changing memory, places where future generations will find their own significance in their past. Young would probably maintain that Peter Eisenman's well-known Berliner memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe should not be assigned to this group of counter-monuments. Nevertheless, I have decided to take you with me today to Berlin from two reasons. The first one regards the participatory and loose character of this memorial. Similarly to Hoheiser's fountain, Eisenman's memorial can only be fully experienced from within, when walking deep into the huge concrete forest between the high pillars. The memorial site has no strict borders, it is open and does not dictate a certain narrative to memorize. Like Young's counter monuments, it forces the visitors to actively search for a meaning themselves. The second reason lies just on the other side of the road. Several steps from the concrete field will take us into the Tiergarten Park, where we will soon encounter another concrete slab a la Eisenman. But unlike the monumental memorial to the murdered Jews, this memorial to homosexuals persecuted under Nazism feels rather intimate between the park's trees. And what makes it even more intimate is a small window through which one can see a looping film of two kissing men in the park. A kiss that was enough reason for persecution under Nazi law. The film is introduced here as a new material in the commemoration landscape. Although not physically flexible or adaptable, it nonetheless does transmit a sense of flexibility. It makes its concrete housing into a big television that could potentially show different films in the future. The observer is exposed to one commemorated narrative, one forbidden kiss, but is also indirectly informed about the possibility of other narratives, other past, present, or future forbidden kisses. As well articulated by Young's concept of counter-monuments, many new memorials abandon the monumental and choose a subtle, personal form to transmit their message. The Stolpersteine, or stumbling stones, for instance, are small brass memorials which upon one might unexpectedly stumble. Engraved with name, date, and place of execution, they replace single pavement stones in front of houses where Nazi victims used to live. The power of the small stones that can easily be overlooked lies in their ongoing potential to surprise unprepared passers-by, reminding those living in European cities of their former, now missing, inhabitants. Initiated in the mid-1990s, the Stolpersteine now approach the amount of 44,000, all prepared by the project's initiator, German artist Gunter Demnig. But Demnig has certainly not initiated and funded himself the laying of each stone. On the contrary, he is very often requested to do so by citizens, survivors, friends, or family members of victims, or citizens who are currently living in their houses. These people commit themselves to prepare and fund the memorial stone. On the project's website, Demnig provides information on how to research about victims' pasts and supplies official application forms that should be sent to the municipality. Demnig created a participatory mechanism with which he encourages citizens to do their own memory work before the memorial is produced. So we no longer talk about an authoritative institute that decides whom, what, or how the obedient public should commemorate, but rather individuals who engage themselves in the construction of the memorial. Well, from this practical participation, we move on to a more substantial participation. The next example takes us to Paris and to the recent, somehow controversial decision of the First District government to dismantle Henry IV from his horse on the Pont Neuf, the New Bridge. While the disappearance of the former king has made some monarchists arch their eyebrows, the decision to construct a tall ladder and enable new emperors to climb up found much enthusiasm among passers-by that did not shy away and contributed personal proposals to what should become the appropriate subject of contemporary admiration. Similarly to the film of Kissing Man, the inviting ladder signifies the flexibility of this memorial and the multiple messages it enables. The empty bronze coat on Lenin's pedestal in Bucharest served the same function. Shortly after the Romanian communist regime was swept away in December 1989, the impressive Lenin statue was removed from its spot as well. A local artist obtained a piece of the bronze statue and casted out of it an open, men's-sized coat whose right sleeve lifted up towards the sky. Here again, visitors may walk up, squeeze themselves into the coat and stretch their right arm through the sleeve. Whatever their chosen hand gesture symbolizes or commemorates, it is a free expression of their own belief, wish, or opinion. Stepping up the stage and standing for what you believe in seems of a special importance in Romania, a country that for long years has suffered from an oppressive dictatorship. So, the multiplicity of narratives these two memorials enable brings us to the different distinctions sociologist Vered Zimitsky-Sarussi makes between multivocal and fragmented commemorations. And I just want to remind you the notions of mixed versus parallel narratives Weber has mentioned yesterday. With the multivocal model, Vinitsky-Serussi described commemoration sites that enable a large heterogeneous group of people to have contradicting interpretations of the same past. At the same time and same spot, these sites give room for different voices, encouraging a shared commemoration work. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, that emphasizes as its narrative the memory of fallen soldiers, but ignores the controversial political context of the war, exemplifies how both proponents and opponents can carry out their commemoration practice together. A fragmented commemoration, on the other hand, takes place in different locations and moments, carried out by different groups that are not willing to make compromises regarding their interpretation of the past. The example Vinitsky-Serussi gives here is the Israeli commemoration of its assassinated Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. While an official ceremony in his memory takes place in the National Memorial in Jerusalem, following the Hebrew calendar, an alternative ceremony takes place at the memorial site on the spot where Rabin was assassinated in Tel Aviv, and follows the civil Gregorian calendar. Two ceremonies that indeed exemplify the division within Israeli society, which is actually often forgotten when the regional, bigger conflict is being discussed. So, Vinitsky-Serussi maintains that a fragmented commemoration will emerge in a contentious society that is divided about its past, while a multivocal commemoration is more likely to emerge in a consensual society that is unified in its will to leave its difficult past behind. In my opinion, however, multivocal commemoration can also take place in a conflictive context, render the subject of dispute, and encourage dialogue. My example, from all places, comes as well from conflict-fraught Israel. Rather surprising in its landscape, this memorial is located in Jaffa, the old city of Tel Aviv, where both Arab/Palestinian and Israeli narratives live seemingly side to side. The memorials stand in a doubtful situation and can be read dually. Designed as an obelisk to commemorate the local events of 1948, it is not clear whether it is an unfinished victory column that celebrates the foundation of Israel, or actually a broken monument that agonizes the Palestinian catastrophe, the Nakba. The memorial is pending between two readings, its focal point not focused. It is a memorial that raises questions rather than providing one answer. Now, before I approach the task of conclusion, I would like to shortly mention two slightly different commemoration projects. The first uses the memorial as a material and provides it with a new meaning. This installation by Australian artist Tom Nicholson is based on a series of photographs depicting Australian war memorials bearing the name Palestine. These memorials were erected around Melbourne in the early 1920s to commemorate the presence of Australian troops in Palestine during World War I. Nicholson had cropped the memorials from their Australian background, printed them on big white sheets and exported them back to Palestine. Here in an exhibition space in Ramallah, the audience is free to take a poster from the pile and support the circulation of these memorials in their new landscape. By a simple gesture of displacement, the artist releases the memorial from its original meaning and casts it into a contemporary relevant discourse. He exposes it to a new public and triggers the emergence of new memories. The second project takes us to a small village in the north of Israel that was founded on, as many other villages, former Palestinian grounds in the middle of the last century. In this case, the artist invited a group of his Israeli friends to his home village and asked them to organize a welcome back ceremony to the Palestinian refugees returning from their exile. During a long weekend, the participants had to engage with this fictive scenario, consider the implications of a possible return, and prepare themselves to the moment it will become their reality. So, by breaking up the linearity of time and its perception, this project opened up a new possibilities for dialogue and means of political engagement. Even though, eventually, the short film document it produced only mirrored the helplessness and embarrassment with which the Israeli society handles its inner and regional conflicts. So, to conclude, in the last decades, we observe an interesting phenomenon in the commemoration landscape. After the living monuments of the post-war's US and the counter-monuments of post-war Germany, we are witnessing the appearance of elastic commemorative projects, flexible memorials that make use of adaptable mechanisms or soft materials, commemoration sites that are multivocal, incorporating different interpretations of one past and provoking dialogue, participative and interactive memorials that break the common relationship between an authority that dictates a narrative and the public that consumes it passively, projects that employ future and fiction in their history writing, temporary installations that emphasize the flexibility of memory and the elasticity of past. Or in other words, empowering commemorative projects that remind each of us of our social and political responsibility towards our past, present, and even more important, towards our shared future. Thank you.